You all know that I'm not one to shy away from controversial topics, and today I'm going to delve into the very controversial topic, the great paperweight debate. I'm not talking about that kind of a paperweight. I'm talking about the weight of the paper that should be in a Schuyler Quentel. The Schuyler Quentel originally, when it came out, I believe had a 45 GSM paper, and then they switched it to make it lighter to a 36 GSM paper, and then in more recent years they've actually switched to an even lighter paper, 28 GSM. And since they've gone particularly from 36 to 28 GSM, people have often voiced their opposition or their preference for the 36 GSM paper. Now, I have a feeling that when it comes to this issue that there are plenty of people who prefer the 28 GSM paper, but I've noticed that the 36 GSM paper people are very vocal and persistent, and I still hear them and see them online saying that they wish that the Quentel would go back to 36 GSM paper. So I thought, obviously people feel strongly about this, so why not talk about it on this video? And actually, I'd like to hear what you think in the comment section. As I said, a lot of the people who are 36 GSM proponents are very vocal. So I'm sure there's going to be some of you out there that are going to say 36 GSM, bring it back. Feel free to leave that in the comment section. But are you a 28 GSM proponent? Let me know in the comments below if you prefer the lighter paperweight. So one point that I really want to make when it comes to this issue, I'm sure some of you are thinking, why does this even matter? And to a lot of people, it doesn't actually matter that much. But there are people to whom it does matter quite a bit. And so what it brings up, though, is that when it comes to the issue of Bibles and Bible production and the way that we think about Bibles, this is something you're really going to notice that a little bit makes a big difference. Something very small or minor can actually make a big difference. So when it comes to how big a Bible is, for example, you would think if someone were to say, this Bible is 9 by 6 inches and this Bible here is 8 by 5 inches, that it's pretty much the same thing. But those of you who've handled a lot of Bibles know that actually that's quite a bit different. That 1 inch in each dimension makes a very big difference in terms of your perception of the size of that Bible. So when it comes to paper, for example, the feel of the paper, even though we're talking about 36 GSM, grams per square meter, I think is what that stands for, versus 28 grams per square meter, that doesn't seem like very much on the surface, and yet there is a little difference in feel that is perceptible to people. The same with the size and the weight of the Bible. You might be talking about, let's say, a half a pound, and when you hear a half a pound or a pound, 16 ounces, 8 ounces, whatever, that's not really that much, and yet when you're holding something in your hand, it is perceptibly different. So a little bit makes a big difference when it comes to Bibles. That's, I think, something to keep in mind. But how you look at this particular issue, 28 GSM versus 36 GSM, really depends on various things. And so I want to point out a couple of things. The first thing is it depends on where you're coming from or what you are comparing to. I happened to watch a video recently of a man who was taste testing coffee because he wanted to see if he could like coffee. He didn't used to like it, but he wanted to see if he could like it. And so he actually had a professional connoisseur of coffee, taste tester or something, come onto his program and help him to taste different coffees. And the expert told him that it's very important when you're tasting coffee to realize that what you have tasted previously will affect the way that you perceive the coffee that you're drinking. So if you taste a very dark roast coffee and then you go to something lighter, versus if you're going from something very light to something that's more medium roast, the way that you perceive that is going to be different depending on what you have tasted previously. So they kept having to mix up the different coffees in order to get a more objective sense of what he really preferred. Well, the same is true with Bibles. A lot depends on what you are coming from, what you're comparing to. And the market, when the Schuyler Quentel came on the scene, I think this was around 2014, certainly there were a lot of thin line Bibles, a lot of smaller Bibles, and people, I think, by and large, were very used to that. Many people were. And so when the Schuyler Quentel came out as a 45 GSM paper Bible, it was considered to be huge. And then they went to 36 GSM. But a lot of people who first received a Schuyler Quentel, first purchased one, had smaller Bibles than even the 36 GSM Schuyler Quentel. So to them it seemed big. But for those who were coming from the 45 GSM Schuyler Quentel, the 36 GSM Schuyler Quentel actually seemed much more portable and less hefty. So that's one thing that makes a big difference, is where you're coming from, what you're comparing to. Another thing that makes a difference, though, is you. Another thing that your perception depends on is you and your use. So for example, how large of a person you are or how small of a person you are is going to definitely affect the way that you look at the size of a Bible, but also your use of a Bible. So if you're going to be carrying it a lot, transporting it a lot versus having it on a desk or in a pulpit, or are you the type of person who doesn't write in your Bible versus the person who does write in your Bible? So your use of the Bible is definitely going to factor into how you look at something like this. But again, like I said, even you yourself, your size, for example, if you're a smaller person, then what you think of as being kind of a big, hard-to-carry Bible is different than some huge guy, let's say. So, it really does come down to these different kinds of factors that are different for different people. So I have the two different size Bibles here, both in the New King James. This green one here is the 36 GSM, the heavier Bible, and this brown one is the 28 GSM, a little bit thinner, lighter Bible. So as you can see in looking at these, they don't actually look all that much different, but like I said toward the beginning, a little bit does actually make quite a bit of difference. And this one definitely is a lighter, thinner Bible. So in comparing these two Bibles, one thing I will say is that actually when you look at the paper itself, the opacity is very similar, although it is technically different, but the opacity is similar. Let me show you something from Mark Bertrand from his review of the Quentel back in 2014. He did a comparison of different weighted paper and actually photographed them, put them next to each other, and you see that on the left here, the 45 GSM Quentel is on the left, then you have the Legacy 36 GSM in the center, and then on the right, the Clarion with 27 GSM paper. So the lightest paper on the right, heaviest paper on the left, and then 36 in between there. And what you'll notice actually is that the opacity is different. Technically you can see a difference there, but it's not a huge difference. They all have some show through, and they're all actually quite readable, even the 27 GSM paper over here from the Clarion. If you go down a little bit, he actually gives the technical specs here on these papers, and he says that the 45 GSM paper has an opacity rating of 84%, and the 27 GSM paper has an opacity rating of 79.5%, and then the 32 GSM paper has an opacity rating of 81.5%. So what you see actually is there is a difference in opacity from 79.5 all the way up to 84%. However, it's not a drastic difference. It's not a huge difference in opacity. So I think for some people this is a big deal to them, but for a lot of people it really isn't that much of a difference. It's not that noticeable. And when you actually compare them in person, and you could probably see from the photos there, it isn't all that different between the 36 and 28 GSM in terms of opacity. But as I said, for some people it is enough of a difference for it to matter to them. But I think a big thing that's different is just the feel of the paper. The 36 GSM does have a little bit more of a hefty feel to it. Some people would say it's easier to turn. It's just easier to hold in your hands because of that little bit extra weight that it has compared to the 28 GSM. And I think that's the biggest thing that people are really perceiving. Sometimes they'll talk about thicker versus thinner paper, but really I think what it is more than anything is that heavier paper, just when you feel it, has a little bit different feel to it, a little heftier feel than that lighter paper. Another thing that's different about these Bibles is their weight and their thickness. And you're actually talking here only about I think a 0.3 inch difference in their thickness. I'm not sure what the different weight is, but I can tell you that this 28 GSM is a lighter weight than the 36 GSM. In the hand, it's not a whole lot different, but over time, if you're holding something, it does make a difference. And as I've been saying repeatedly, a little bit does make a big difference. So I feel like the 28 GSM for a lot of people just has a little bit lighter, easier to hold feel to it, a little easier to handle because it is lighter and thinner. And so it's just nice in the hand to have that little bit lighter Bible. But if you're someone who is thinking more in terms of having it on a desk or in the pulpit, then a heavier Bible may not be a problem at all. Or as I said, if you're just a larger person, then this size Bible is not really an issue. But it is, to me, heavier in the hand, not quite as manageable as the 28 GSM. So the weight and the thickness of these Bibles is different. Also, the look is different when you're looking at the page. And it's interesting to see how it's changed over time with the Schuyler Quentel. The earlier Quentels, at least from what I'm looking at here, had a lighter font to them. It was like a little bit thinner looking. Whereas the newest Quentels are getting into a more bold font. But the older Quentels had better opacity in the paper, so less show-through when you were looking at the page. So it's really just a trade-off. Do you want a lighter font with more opacity in the paper, or do you prefer a heftier font and have that lighter paper that, again, makes a lighter Bible? So it's just a trade-off, just differences in how they've chosen to produce these Bibles. And then finally, I would say, one difference that you may see is for those who like to write in their Bible or highlight in their Bible. I would imagine that the 36 GSM paper is probably a little bit better for writing in. It's probably a little bit sturdier and maybe a little bit less show-through when you're writing in your Bible. I myself don't write in the Bible, so I really don't have any way to demonstrate that theory, but I think from what other people have said, and it just seems logical to me that that little heftier paper is going to take to writing better. So that's my little rundown of the debate between the 28 GSM and 36 GSM paper in the Schuyler Quentel. I know this was somewhat of a nerdy topic for people that are really into premium Bibles. Some of you maybe don't really care about this at all, but thank you if you've made it this far and are still watching. Regardless of how much you've thought about this before or how into this topic you are, I would love to hear what you think in the comment section below. But thank you so much for taking some time to look at this topic with me from a Frisch perspective.